For most chess players, playing a world championship match is the culmination of a career. For Viswanathan Anand, his world championship match against Garry Kasparov in 1995 was almost more the beginning of a career. Certainly, he'd been around for a while before the match. He became a grandmaster and had been playing at the top of chess since 1988. However, only 7 years later, at the age of 25, he's playing against Garry Kasparov, and we know now that most of his best games and many important moments in his career are still ahead of him. Even though this match took place outside of the auspices of FIDE, it was still regarded as a legitimate world championship match because Kasparov was still clearly the strongest player in the world. The match opened with 8 draws, an excellent achievement for the challenger to start stably. For a while, 8 draws was the record to open a match up until this past World Championship cycle. However, now, in this, Game 9, Anand is going to break the cycle of draws. Anand opens here with e4, and we get into a Scheveningen structure in the Sicilian. Now, the Scheveningen might be kind of a big word that possibly you've never heard before. You would never hear it outside of a Sicilian defense context in chess. But the Scheveningen simply refers to this structure here. Black puts pawns on d6, puts pawns on e6, and says, all right, I've got a solid position in the middle of the board. I've got an extra center pawn relative to your one center pawn on e4, right? 2 pawns versus 1 pawn in the center. I'm going to allow you more space and more development in the attempt to crack my position, and if you can't do that, I'll be better in the long run. It leads to complex and interesting play. It certainly suits Kasparov's style, but we should remember that Anand is no slouch in the Sicilian either, as he shows in this game. After some further moves, we get a new move on move 12, a new move for this match anyway, as Anand decides that he's going to put his bishop on f3 instead of on d3 as he'd previously been doing. And he kind of commits at this point to further expansion on the queen side. I like the move queen d3 in this position, which stakes a solid space in the center for the white queen. It's just a natural move that seems to harmonize everything in white's position. And after rook d1, I think it's pretty clear that Anand isn't playing for a typical attack on the king side in the Sicilian. Instead, he'll be playing on the queen side. Bishop to b7. And this is a good time for you to pause the video and figure out what the best move is, the move that Anand played. The move b4 isn't too difficult, but it's still pleasant and instructive. The queen cannot capture on b4 because the only question after rook b1 is which square the queen will be trapped on. Will it be trapped on a3, right here? Or will the queen be trapped on a5, like so? Obviously, it doesn't matter much to Kasparov. He's not going to do that. And after b4, he retreats queen to c7. Anand now starts expanding further on the queen side with b5, rook b1, and after some exchanges, we get a position where Anand has the bishop pair, Anand has open files for his rooks, and he's got a clear advantage where he can press and press and press and try to win this game, and Kasparov just has to hope to hold on, defend, and draw. This is everything you could want in a position in a world championship match with the white pieces. After rook over to a8, Anand is going to continue to seize space on the queen side. He's going to solidify his position there, and he's going to solidify his position on the king side, playing h3, which I think is a nice, timely move to deal with back rank issues and kind of anything that could happen in the future over there. After the move queen to e6, I definitely recommend pausing your video and figuring out how to make progress if you're playing the white position. Now, the white position looks great. Again, bishop pair, open files for the rooks, more space. Black doesn't really have any targets or any real ideas. Who wouldn't love playing the white pieces? But what do we do to try to win this game? What Anand does is rook to d5. I think this is a brilliant move. I've always been inspired by this kind of exchange sacrifice. Just having the guts to stick the piece right there in the middle of the board. Forget tactics. This isn't about tactics. Forget calculation. This isn't about calculation. This is about pure positional understanding, right? Anand is just saying, go ahead, take the rook. I know you're getting 5 for the rook. I'm only getting 3 for your knight. But what really matters is I'm going to open up my bishops. I'm going to establish passed pawns. And my pieces now have a way forward. And your pieces really don't have any hope of activity. This A8 rook, no matter what the 5 versus 3 math says, is not going to be as good as my bishops in the position that comes about. It is interesting that later in another World Championship match against Carlsen, there was a similar exchange sacrifice by Anand when he played his rook into b4, offering an exchange sacrifice. And in that case, Carlsen was able to accept it and went on to convert what, in my opinion, was a brilliant game. So these exchange sacrifices don't always work, right? They can be refuted at times, but this is not one of those cases. Anand gives 2 question marks to the move knight takes d5, which I think is really interesting because my version of Stockfish here actually says, yeah, you should take the rook. That's the right thing to do. And I have to say also that I would take the rook. Even though I don't think I would want to play black here after rook d5, I would definitely capture, because if you don't capture, it tends to feel like the position is only going to improve for white. I don't know what black's idea is. I don't know how black is going to achieve counterplay. And after further improving moves, c5, rook d1, I kind of feel like I'm probably going to have to take the rook anyway later, and probably I'm going to have to do it in a worse position. However, Anand and the computer, if you give it enough time to think and kind of push it, say a move like h5 instead of taking the rook, would still leave white, with no direct way to press the advantage home. He's put his rook on a good square, so rook d5 is still a good move. But if the sacrifice is not accepted, then Kasparov is not yet lost. So after Kasparov does decide to take the rook, again, 2 question marks according to Anand, we recapture, opening the bishop, gaining the protected past d-pawn. The queen steps away from the pawn's attack. Pawn to c5 and e4. e4 has to happen. It's the only source of counterplay that Kasparov is going to get in this game, and the bishop retreats. Rook to e5, I think, is a very nice move. Kasparov is the kind of player who's always going to find counterplay. He's trying to lift the rook and create some counterplay on the king side, some hope of a perpetual check, for example. Anand slides in with queen to d7, attacking the b7 pawn. Of course, if b7 goes, white will have 3 passed pawns, and one of them will very, very soon be a queen. So after queen to d7, I do think this is where there was some hope for Kasparov. Stockfish immediately says e3 is the better move in this position than what Kasparov played, and that kind of makes sense. There's a hit on this rook on b1 that needs to be attended to, so the rook is going to need to move. And when the rook moves, the queen's gaining some chances of counterplay with queen c2, for example. Kasparov's move is more direct. He instead plays rook g5 in this position, which makes some sense, but it's really hard to believe that the queen and rook are going to get enough counterplay against the white king. So if that's not true, then he's kind of committing everything here. The rook would be better on e5 than it will be on g5 if you can't actually break through. So at this point, I'd say that Kasparov's put everything into some hope of counterplay and a perpetual against the white king. And if Anand can hold on, then he's going to win the game when he refutes that attempt for counterplay. Rook g1 defends the g2 pawn, pawn to e3, pawn to d6, queen takes b7 was also good. Rook to g3, queen takes b7, and queen to e6. Now, in this position, I again want you to pause your video, try and figure out what Anand played. The right move makes Kasparov resign. The wrong move just about gives up a draw on the spot. So let me give the wrong move first, because Anand said that he almost played this. Well, tell you what, let me give a very wrong move first. A very wrong move would be queen takes a8, which I'm assuming no one went for. That allows rook takes h3 check, pawn captures legally forced, and queen takes h3 is mate. Of course, Kasparov's not expecting Anand to fall for this. I mean, the threat is there, but he knows that Anand's not going to fall for this, and Anand, certainly spotted this threat, way before the threat even appeared on the board. However, there is a more subtle threat here. After rook f1, which Anand admits that he almost played here because it looks very natural to simply make some luff for the king and to move the rook to a better square where it can be more active, Kasparov has a big trick. Rook to b8, decoying the white queen away from the long diagonal. Now, the queen can go to c6, as pointed out by Stockfish, and Stockfish says that white should still win in this position. But queen c6 is the only winning move, and of course, white has to dodge quite a few tricks to find queen c6 first, and there might still be some tricks to be dodged at this point. After rook b8, if the white queen accepts the rook sacrifice, then there's rook takes h3. It's pretty clear that accepting the rook on h3 is an immediate perpetual. The queen will simply check from these two squares as long as she wants to. But what's surprising is that king g1 also does not save the day. It seems like white has just won a whole rook. You just avoid capturing the rook on h3 and you're okay. But now queen e5, and white has no way to avoid the perpetual check. At this point, white pretty much has to accept the rook on h3, and black gets the perpetual with queen to g3 check. Pawn takes, check, and you can see the perpetual right here. After a few moves, we get 3-time repetition of the position and a draw. So how did Anand force resignation and not fall for this trap here? In this position, he simply played the move king h2, and Kasparov resigned on the spot. It's move 35, and Kasparov didn't even try to play out the last 5 moves to get to move 40. Both rooks are under attack here, and although queen e5 looks dangerous, it actually doesn't do anything. White can simply capture the rook here on a8. There's no meaningful check from the black rook, and white is up oodles of material and could very, very soon, if he's in a showing off sort of mood, add 3 queens to the board, in just 5 more moves, for example. So I hope you enjoyed that game. I really, really enjoy that kind of play at a world championship level. Rook d5 is a beautiful exchange sacrifice. The play after that just looks so effortless and fluid. In general, Anand kind of makes it look easy to beat Kasparov when we know that Kasparov is one of the greatest, most resourceful players in chess history, and he provides just a beautiful, beautiful game in which he's dominant from start to finish. If you like that video, please give the video a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you again soon for a future video. Thanks so much, and have a great day.